Hey folks, Dust here, and I wanted to discuss compLexity making a change to their lineup here after the major, and this is nothing departing the team and coming into his place is going to be SicK. So I want to talk a little bit about compLexity lately, talk about this move, talk about their future. You know the drill. You've seen these roster change videos before. So first off, with their lineup after they brought in Ricky and compLexity, they were off to a really cold start. They had a really tough time at Power Masters. They had a really tough time at the E-League Invitational. And then they weren't able to qualify for IM Sydney online, losing to Swole Patrol and Luminosity there. And so things were really rough. And then they went to the major after a boot camp, and they lost their first two games in a pretty one-sided fashion, but they also played some of the better teams at that tournament, Astralis and Made in Brazil. They then upset Energy 2-0 in a best of three, which is pretty nuts. That was pretty crazy. But then they did lose to FaZe in a best of three. So they basically went out in the first stage they played in with a 1-3 record. Including that, though, like I said, a pretty cool little upset win over Energy. Both those games went into, extra rounds. They were really tight games, but they did come out on top. And they did take a map off of FaZe in a best of three and had a really close loss on Dust 2. It was 14-16. So they almost beat FaZe. And may have been able to have a chance in like a 2-2 game to maybe try to make it. But it was pretty unlikely just based on the level of play they were showing and kind of what was going on with them leading into the tournament. Now, after returning back from that, we haven't really seen them too much since the major. They've played a little bit in ECS, and I think they wound up actually taking a spot from Rogue from week one because they lost to Rogue, I think, in the week one finals after beating E United and Energy. And so since Rogue dissolved, I think they just get that spot, so they don't need to compete anymore in the ECS regular season. They will be at the LAN finals, to my knowledge. That was after they had already kind of lost out in week two pretty early to Furia. So yeah, they get that, but not totally to their performance. Part of it's a little bit because of just Rogue's departure, but you get my point. And then after that, they competed in the DreamHack Masters Dallas qualifiers, and they lost out pretty quick in that to Furia and Envy after beating Singularity. So didn't really do too hot in that tournament. And as far as the move goes, it is, of course, nothing coming out for SicK. And with nothing leaving, I think we all kind of knew that nothing was a temporary player for this team. It was very hard to see him become a permanent member. I'm sure he considered it. And I think he even said as much in some stuff that came out after the move was announced on social media and things of that nature. But the reality is that nothing has so many options available to him. Very much like someone like Shroud, who was a big streamer, and when he retired from Cloud9, it was kind of a smart business decision in his front to do that because of how big of a streamer he could become, committing to it full time. Nothing is that same type of person who can definitely do that. He's definitely very entertaining, has a great personality. He's also pretty talented in games. Even if he's not competing at a top professional level, he can still play games and be a really skilled player in probably any game that he touches. So when you're going to watch him, you're going to watch him for the skill and the crazy stuff he can pull off, but also because he's very entertaining. He has like a crazy personality, and so he can do a lot with that, whether he wants to be a streamer, whether he wants to be talent at events as like a desk analyst or commentator or something like that, whether he wants to be someone who works as an influencer with different brands or does consulting. He has a lot of experience in a lot of different areas, and so I think that really he's just so versatile in what he can do, and kind of tying yourself down to just competing as a professional player where you're locked into that team, that schedule, those sponsors. It's one of those things that can be kind of limiting for someone like him. And maybe he just doesn't want to commit that many hours of his time just playing Counter-Strike and trying to be the best at Counter-Strike when he can be doing these other things he wants to do in life. So I think that it was one of those things where you kind of saw that coming, right? And so to get a replacement for him, they've actually picked up SicK, and this is kind of happenstance, I feel like, because Rogue had just kind of dissolved, and maybe they knew about it before it got publicly announced, obviously, and they were probably in talk with him for a little bit. But yeah, I didn't know that this move was coming because I thought that Rogue, was kind of sit where they were. They were kind of trying to work their way through some stuff, and they had just qualified for the ECS, and they were doing some other cool stuff online. So I thought that was actually going all right. But apparently, an offer came in for Nico and MSL, which, as I'm recording this video, that hasn't been announced yet. But a lot of talk is that it's going to be them moving over to Optic, of course, to just move back to Denmark, beautiful Danish lineup, and it's kind of hard for MSL and Nico to kind of turn down a situation like that. And Vice, of course, got announced to be a trial member for Cloud9, which I'll do a separate video on that. So, with the team kind of falling apart, it was a great opportunity for someone like compLexity to pick up a player like SicK, who's still, a pretty promising talent. Obviously he's been kind of surpassed by some of the other youthful players of his generation, like a Twist, for example, or a Naf, who's come up really strong. He was kind of in that same that same category of age and stuff like that. And you know, a couple players have passed him by, but he still definitely brings a good bit to the table. Definitely still can be a good performer. And so it was certainly a good opportunity for compLexity to pick up this player. And I mean, they did obviously try to grab Tarek and try to get some big names, but this wasn't possible. So since that wasn't a possibility, picking up someone like SicK was actually a really good move for compLexity. They were in need of a player. They probably needed a little bit more firepower, and they needed someone like SicK who can be a pretty versatile player. I mean, I've always kind of known him to be at his best when he's more of like a entry or secondary entry type fragger, but I've definitely seen some times when he's been more of a peripheral player, kind of like an active playmaker on the edge of the map. So he can definitely be slotted in different positions, and I'm not sure exactly how compLexity will use him. I think it would be pretty nuts to see Stanislaw and SicK be kind of an entry duo, while, you know, Ricky and Def play the edges of the map and he has Shazam as an opper. But you could also have Ricky be a little bit of an entry and either combo him with SicK or combo him with Stanislaw. And either Stanislaw or SicK could also, you know, play those solo roles on the edge of the map if they so choose. And whenever you go for an actual execute, a set piece, being able to throw in Stanislaw, SicK, and Ricky and stuff like that to open it up alongside Shazam's op is you know, a pretty nice little grouping to have, right? So there's definitely a lot of different possibilities. And so I definitely can see where SicK can add some value, and where, given the situation where, you know, compLexity we're struggling to pick up someone like Tarek, and maybe we're struggling to attract other big names, you know, going with SicK, I definitely think it can still be very beneficial to this team. And hopefully we'll start seeing them get some improvement, because obviously times have been rough. And that even goes back into, you know, late last year, you know, outside of like CS Summit 3 and maybe like one other event, they were really tanking after the Face It Major, after they had that crazy run. And that's really kind of continued even, you know, when they brought Ricky and nothing on board through most of what they played in, you know, outside of that upset over energy at the Major and maybe a couple of little online best of threes here and there. They've also lost some best of threes that you feel like they should win. So that's that. I mean, as far as where the compLexity stands now, I mean, they have Stanislaw, who, again, is probably still one of the best in-game leaders you can get. And he's also a really good fragger when it comes to IGL standards. So definitely still valuable to have this guy still on board. You have Shazam, who's a pretty solid opper. Again, there's not many other people that this team could have recruited to be a primary opper. And Shazam's playing well enough to merit remaining on this team, I think. And again, even if you wanted to upgrade, I'm not sure that there's really anything available unless you recruit a European player of some kind. So I don't think there's really anyone in North America that you can really get that would make sense. And maybe back in the day, you could have argued for like Nifty or something back when he was still like a kind of a prospect as a primary opera coming off of Renegades. But outside of that, I mean, there's really not much to speak of at this moment. So I mean, those are still pretty good foundational pieces for compLexity to build from. And maybe those, having a guy like Stanislaw, who's a pretty respected IGL, can even help attract talent going down the line. Then you have Def, who I'm not totally 100% sold on, but I mean, he definitely isn't like a crazy fragging burden on the team, but he certainly isn't going to be like a star level player or someone who's going to have heavy fragging volume. But for whatever reason, the organization, the players on the team see a lot in him. Maybe they're just things that I can't see, the intangibles, maybe being like a secondary leader or some of the supporting that he does, or taking up, you know, positions that other people don't want to play. I mean, the mentality he brings to the table. I mean, all of those are not things I can witness by watching a demo. Again, I don't think that he's gotten to a point where his fragging has become too much of a burden, where it doesn't justify anything else positive he might be doing for the team. It hasn't gotten that bad yet. But I have to imagine that if compLexity were to make any more moves in the future, someone like Def or someone like Ricky are probably the next two on the chopping block, because you definitely want to retain talents like Stanislaw and Shazam. You just picked up SicK. So if compLexity ever feels the need to make further changes to try to, you know, get themselves in better position, then it is going to wind up being guys like Def and Ricky who are going to be, you know, probably next in line to be considered. So just kind of want to put that one out there. And then, yeah, Ricky, it hasn't gone as well as I had thought. I mean, this guy I actually thought was playing quite well on Rogue, and he was quite good during his event with CLG. So I actually expected him to come in and be a really valuable piece of this team, be a secondary opper, be an aggressive rifler, but be flexible in what roles he could play with the rifles. And I thought he would do quite well, but he's actually struggled a lot. You know, at some of these events that he's played, he's been one of the poorest performers on compLexity at some of these different lands and some of the online play they've done. I will say he's had a recent uptick in form online during some of the ECS play in the DreamHack Masters Dallas qualifier. So maybe that was just a rut in transition. You know, maybe he was just having a hard time adjusting to the new environment. I know apparently he still isn't even at the facility, that he's like living in Canada because of visa issues and stuff like that, and he's not with the team. So maybe there's a lot of different situations that are causing him to not perform at the level that he was performing at when he was on Rogue and on CLG, kind of going back, and that goes back to like 2017 though at CLG, to be fair. But yeah, I mean, hopefully he can kind of pick it back up. I definitely think if he can get back on form, he can definitely bring value to this team, but I'm not really sure. And then, yeah, with SicK coming in, again, this I definitely think that, he's had against someone like Twist, who he played side by side on TSM, has kind of flown by him as far as like, you know, skill level and, I guess stature, I guess you could say. But he still has played pretty well all through his days with Rogue. Definitely been one of their better fraggers. Definitely been a pretty solid piece to have. Again, can be kind of an entry fragger, but also can flex into other roles if need be. And I definitely think he's going to be able to bring something to the table as long as he can mesh well with the team, personality-wise, as long as they can, gel him into the team, like with either a boot camp or just however they practice and prepare. If they can, find roles that he's comfortable playing and that will best benefit the team, I think that he can definitely add an element to the team that's going to be positive. The thing is, though, when I look at the team as a whole, I do wonder, like, who's meant to be the superstar player. Sometimes Stanislaw can be that. Sometimes he can take over a game and put up ludicrous numbers, and you're just like, taken aback. But that really shouldn't be how it works. I mean, this guy's your in-game leader. It's very rare to have an in-game leader who's like the superstar of the team at the same time. Usually it's one or the other. Either you're an IGL who's a superstar, but you're probably not much of an in-game leader. You're kind of just doing it out of necessity, or, you're doing it, very loosely. You're not like really controlling the team very much. Like it's more kind of rule by, democracy or something like that with the team. And so you're no more as the fragger and you're just kind of doing IGL on the side. Or, you're a full-time IGL and that's your main focus, but you can still frag pretty well. But you're still not going to be the superstar of the team. This is like, Glaive on a Shas, for instance, right? So I think it's a bit much expecting Stanislaw to not only be the leader of this team, but to also be your most consistent performer when it comes to fragging. Like, in theory, if this team is meant to ever, like, really climb and start challenging teams like Liquid and Energy and some of these teams at the top of the region, then Stanislaw probably should be, like, your third best player or something. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like you really need some heavy hitters above him. He can't be your heavy hitter and the tactician. Shazam could be that, sure. And I will say at times he definitely can have big games, but I would say more often than not, he kind of performs at the level that you would want like your third best player to be at or something like that, right? Again, it's no knock to him. It's not like he's bad. Again, I think he's actually one of the more stable operators in the region right now, because a lot of the operators we do have playing in North America are imports, like SicK on Energy, for example. Our Team Liquid has Nitro kind of the primary opera, but it's more musical chairs over there on who's opping. I guess it is mostly Nitro on T sides, but there are certain maps where someone else will pick it up, and obviously on CT sides it can be all over the place, so it's kind of hard to call him like a true operator just because of how that team operates. But yeah, after that, it's like Automatic just started doing it on Cloud9. He's definitely doing pretty well with it so far, but I'm not sure if that's actually going to be a long-term thing or not, or if if Cloud9 will eventually recruit a primary opper. So I think the jury's still a little bit out on that, even though he's done a good job so far. Yeah, you have like Nifty and JDM over on Envy. You have Cooper, who's on E United, and he's just kind of starting to get some pro-level play under his belt. And then really outside of that, I mean, you have like Wardell. That is probably the number one opper in NA right now, is Wardell over on Ghost Game, and the Canadian player. And then after that, it gets really, really murky waters. So, yeah, I think that Shazam can be that. I think he's still a pretty good ranked opper as far as North American players go. But again, he doesn't really feel like a superstar carry level player as far as the numbers that he produces. And then obviously Def is more of a supportive factor. Obviously Ricky has had his struggles. And even when he was on Rogue, while he was a good fragger and he was quite stable, it wasn't as if he was putting up monster numbers in his own right. So it's like you have like a bunch of players who are, above average and certainly good enough to be on a team like this and good enough to compete at a professional level, and good enough to even be like in the middle of a pack team that competes for, playoff spots. But in theory, you should only probably have like 3 of those types of players, right? And you need to have like 1 or 2 really big superstar level players, which Tarek would have been that for compLexity probably if they could have gotten him. And it's not their fault that they couldn't, right? It just didn't work out. So I think in the future, this team probably does need some type of superstar player. Now, whether SicK can develop into that or not, whether Shazam can really step up to the plate and be that, I think the jury's obviously still out on that, but we've been waiting a long time for it to be Shazam to be the carry of this team. And again, he can do it sometimes, but when you really look at some of the offline statistics and stuff like that, while he can put up good numbers, they're not excellent numbers. You see what I'm saying? You need someone who can put up those excellent numbers, and I think compLexity is still really much in the hunt for that. Again, it's actually pretty crazy to think that it's actually Stanislaw who at LAN sometimes is going to be the guy putting up those excellent numbers. He's the in-game leader. So that's kind of my concern, I guess, is I still feel like there's a little bit of star power in this team. I think there's a lot of good players in this team. I think there's like a superstar on this team. And while I think that the way things shake down, you basically have like Liquid at the top, you have Energy up near the top, you have Ghost Gaming probably still up near the top, even though some of their online play very recently has been a little bit dodgy, but they were so good in pro leagues last year and had a couple of cool things, qualified for some lands, so I definitely would still consider them up there. If Made in Brazil can ever get their act together, then they would certainly be up there. They had a pretty good major, but then obviously flopped at Blast, so I think they're still kind of waiting to see what's going to happen with them, but let's just say they do figure it out. That's like kind of 14 to the top, and after that you basically have like Renegades, would be in the mix. And then I think Fury is on their way up. I think they're going to kind of be in a position like this here pretty soon. So I think compLexity has a good enough lineup to kind of compete with, like, say, an E United or let's say Luminosity or Envy or some of these other teams that are competing at a professional level. But like Renegades, Liquid, Energy, Ghost, Made in Brazil, I think those teams are still probably in better position than compLexity. If they ever want to try to leapfrog some of those teams, then again, I do wonder if they're going to eventually need to find a way to get a superstar on this team that can really help be a carry. That or everyone's got to perform, really, really well together and make sure that the numbers are really balanced across the board, something like that. But again, I think the SicK pickup is definitely a good move for compLexity, especially given their situation and the fact that they tried to attract, bigger talent and couldn't get it. Definitely happy with this move. I think this will help out the team. Hopefully Rick is going to start getting back in shape. Online very recently looks like he might, so he could be a contributing factor to their success, as well as just finding a way to use SicK properly and get him comfortable. I do wonder also about coaching staff. I don't know if they've ever actually picked up another head coach since Rambo departed for Cloud9. I don't know if they just intend for Warden to be the head coach, but before they had him as a manager, and then they had, Rambo as a head coach. So obviously coaching might be something to think about as well for compLexity's future. But yeah, I'll definitely keep my eye on this team. Again, I think they're still going to be a pretty strong middle-of-the-pack team in the region, but as far as them being a top team in the region, I'm going to need to see a little bit more evidence before I could ever really think that that's a possibility. And again, there might be more moves needed for that to really be a real option. So I hope you folks enjoyed this video. Please subscribe for more content. Catch you next time.